welcome everybody once again. So glad that you're here with us, especially if you're actually in the room. It's always a wonderful thing when people show up and are in the room with us, but also for those of you joining us later online. We love you. But glad all of you really are here. This is a wrap-up today of a series we've been in, a 5-week series called The Gospel According to Matthew. And essentially what we've been doing is looking at the life of Jesus according to, or from the perspective of this one guy named Matthew. As you know, we have 4 gospel accounts of the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You should be familiar with that right at the beginning of your New Testament. And so all together, collectively, they give us lots of details about the story of Jesus, about his life, what he did, where he went. But essentially in this series, we've been asking the question, what if we just had Matthew? What if we only had his gospel? What would we learn? What would we know? And so essentially, just as kind of a recap, here is where we've been over the last few weeks together. These are the things that we know about Jesus, some of the things that we've highlighted. First of all, that Jesus, Matthew presents Jesus as the fulfillment of Israel's history. That Jesus came and he wasn't just a continuation of something from the past. Jesus was actually the fulfillment of Israel's history. In other words, everything that Israel had gone through, all of their history was ultimately pointing to the person of Jesus. Jesus was the culmination of all of that. He was the climax of Israel's history. And he was starting something brand new, which is what we've talked about each week, that really what Jesus came to do. He didn't just come to bring news for the Jews. This was news for everybody. And so it was brand new. This was not an extension of the old. This was something this was the end of the old. That is in the past. I'm starting something new. And I'm presenting it to the world, but it's for the world. And it's for you and me. And it's not just the Jews, it's not just the people of Israel, it's everybody. And then, a couple of weeks ago, we said that Matthew tells us that Jesus revealed an upside-down kingdom. That Jesus, he often talked about, I'm initiating the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of heaven is like this, or this is what the kingdom of God is like, and that it's not just a future thing, but that it's a here and now thing. And so Jesus would present what the kingdom of heaven was like. And oftentimes he used really strange language. He would do these contrasting statements. He would say things like, if you want to save your life, then you've got to lose your life. And if you want to, and those of you who lose your life for me and for my sake will save their life. Or if you want to be first, then you shall be last. And the last shall be first. Just crazy statements like that. Or those of you who want to be great among you has to be willing to serve you, to actually be your slave. This is the kind of thing that was really blowing people's minds. It seemed to give Jesus such authority because it was so different. This was so countercultural to what they knew and understood. And then Jesus ultimately began to invite people to follow him. He was presenting this new kingdom, this new way, and then he would invite people to follow him. And the invitation that Jesus extended was very simple. He just said, follow me. He didn't say, believe in me. He didn't say, trust in me. He didn't say, go get your life together, then we can talk. Then we'll meet for coffee. He just said, just come follow me. Just like you are, as you are, just come follow me. And that's what he began to do. And then Jesus, we talked about last week, he introduced and established these new house rules. In other words, the complex system of the law and of commandments and regulations and trying to do everything and to strive in order to get to God, in order to do things you're on your own in order to get to God. That was in the past. It was no more. Jesus was introducing something new. And so he narrowed it down just to a couple of new house rules. He says, I just need you to love God and to love God's people. Love God and love God's people. You obey those two things, then you will have already obeyed everything else that I've commanded. And so that's where we've been the last few weeks. Well, today, I want to, as we wrap this up, let's think about, what would be one of the best ways to really land the plane. And, of course, we could extend this to a 52-week series, and there's so many intricate details, all the intricacies and celluloids, all of those things. Yeah, that's just for those of you who understand that. He talks about a lot of stuff, but what's maybe one of the most important parts that I want to make sure that we don't miss, that he includes. And here's the thing, if you're a skeptic, if you're not a Jesus follower, you wouldn't consider yourself a Christian. Maybe you've got some hang-ups and some pushback with the whole Jesus, Bible, religion, Christianity thing. I totally get that. But I need you to really pay attention. It's worth paying attention to this part of the story that we're going to look at today. Because this part of the story, here's why, actually happened. Has actually happened and is happening. It's undeniable. And so the only thing you're left with is you've got to be willing to ask yourself, so what does that mean then? How do you even explain that outside or aside from the fact that Jesus actually is who he says he was, and that he actually did what he said he was going to do, and that he actually is alive, and that he's active, and that he's working in the world today? Because there's just not another way to explain the miracle that has taken place. And so that's the part of the story that I want us to look at. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to backtrack a little bit first. We're going to go back to where we were in the story a couple of weeks ago. Then we're going to fast forward to the end of the story. We're going to kind of catch a little point in the middle, and then we're going to go to the end of the story. And so we're going to go back to a time in Jesus' ministry. As you know, last week we were right in that last week of his life on earth. So now we're going to backtrack a little bit. We're going to go to a point in his ministry when he has taken just his 12 disciples, and they have traveled. He has taken them all the way to the very northern border. If you've ever seen a map of like ancient Israel, the very northern border, along the Mediterranean, 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, to this kind of remote location. It was an area that they wouldn't have traveled to very often, literally 150 miles from Jerusalem. This was a long haul. This wasn't just a half-day kind of trip. This took a minute to get there. This was a long way, and he takes them to this remote place, to a city, to a region called Caesarea Philippi. Now, you may be familiar with that language, but here's what it looks like today. Not a lot happening, okay? Not a lot going on there. It's matter of fact, it's very sparsely populated at this point, even that entire region. But at the time, this was a thriving city. I mean, this was really a hub. It was not only a long way from Jerusalem, but really it was very few Jewish people in the neighborhood, if you know what I'm saying. This was pagan territory, and this is where Jesus has taken them. And it's located, what's here and what kind of made this a popular spot even today is that this was one of the primary sources of the Jordan River. There were springs that kind of flowed out of this, and there's a grotto that's even still there to this day, this cave, this natural cave back in the cut into the side of the mountain, this natural cave at the base of Mount Hermon, kind of the south side of that. And since then, people had really over the course of a couple of millennia have put temples there and have worshipped the Greek god of Pan. That was one of the, hot spots for pagan worship. And Jesus has taken, he's kind of left the crowds behind, and he's not healing anybody at the moment. And, they've kind of gotten a little fame going on, and a lot of people are knowing he takes his guys to this place to where nobody really knows who they are. I'm sure nobody did. And he's just got his kind of closest followers with him. And they show up in this place, Caesarea Philippi, in order to ask them a question. And I think it's strategic. Matthew doesn't really point to it, but I think it's interesting that he mentions, hey, this is where we were when he said this. I think there was a reason for that. He takes them all the way to Caesarea Philippi in order to ask a very familiar question if you've read through this before. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? He takes them all the way there to ask them the question, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, the reason I think that's such a significant question at this location is because if you remember from history, if you remember from your history books, a man named Julius Caesar, he died in 44 BC. He was, right before there were emperors. He was just, leader of Rome. Julius Caesar was the Caesar and in charge, dies in 44 BC, and then they deified him a couple of years later. In other words, they attributed godlike qualities to Julius Caesar and said, see, he's a god. He's a god. He is with the gods. So then, that's why his adopted son, Caesar Augustus, later was referred to often as the Son of the deified or the Son of the divine. That was one of his titles, because essentially he was the son of a god, is the way they would refer to him, because he was in Julius Caesar's will, he was given authority and given the throne. And he was the first emperor. And when he became emperor, that's how people started to refer to him. Hey, he's the son of a god. He's the son of the divine, of the deified. Well, then in 14 AD, Caesar Augustus dies. A man named Philip II, he comes in and he names that city for Augustus, because he had been given this area, this district. He named it for Caesar Augustus and for himself, and he called it Caesarea Philippi. So with that in mind, I can't help but think that as they're traveling to Caesarea Philippi, these are some of the conversations that they're having. They're going here and they're thinking, okay, we're going to Caesarea Philippi. Don't really know why we're going there. There's not really a Jewish population there, Jesus. Okay, that's where you want us to go. And I can just imagine them like being just outside the city, and he's wanting to pose this question, and they're already having conversations about, why you remember Augustus who died, just a few years ago. This was, maybe 15 years or so later that Jesus' disciples and him are walking into this city, and they're talking about Julius or Augustus, and that he was the son of the divine. And then Jesus poses this question: who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they come up with some answers. Well, we've heard that people call you Elijah, and some Jeremiah, some say John the Baptist, and they're curious. But Jesus then says, okay, well, that's what they say, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? That's an interesting question. In other words, I want to know what you think. And Peter immediately pipes up, because he kind of became sort of the spokesperson. It's like Peter's thinking, okay, so I see what you're getting at here. I know what you're doing here. You are the one we've been waiting for. You're the Messiah. Notice what he says, the Son of the living God. You're the one. You're the one we've been waiting for. And here we are. I see what you're doing here. You took us to this place. And there's a lot of people around here who look to Caesar Augustus as, the son of a deified, a former Caesar, son of the divine, son of the deified, and yet now you're asking us, so what does that mean for me? What do you think about me? And you're not the son of a dead Caesar, you're the son of the living God. That's who you are. I can just imagine that was a poignant question. And he was asking, you've seen what I can do. You've been with me for a while now. You know the way that I teach. You know that I have fulfilled all kinds of prophecies of old. You've seen what I've done. You've seen who I am. You've heard me. And so who do you think that I am? And Peter's like, you've got to be the one. And this was like the first time that those disciples had confessed that. They had been thinking it. Jesus had hinted at it. But here Peter is professing that Jesus is the Son of the living God, not just the son of a dead, deified Caesar. You're the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, you nailed it. That's it. You are absolutely right. And let me tell you something, Peter, and this is an interesting segue. He says, I tell you that you are Peter because I named you that, Kepha. I named you Peter a while back, or Cephas, however you want to say that. And on this rock, I will build my church. Now, you've heard that before. Scholars disagree and argue about what Jesus is really referring to here as the rock, as this foundation of the church, because that seems to be the important part here. They argue, some would say, well, obviously it's Peter because, Jesus changed Peter, his name to Peter's name was Simon. He changed it to Peter, which means the rock, and so obviously it means him. Other scholars would say no, because Jesus elsewhere in Scriptures is referred to as the cornerstone, as the foundation of the church. And so he's really referring to himself and those who are a part of himself. Those who profess him as Messiah, like Peter did, that's the backbone of the church. And so, here's the thing. Regardless of where you land on that, I think the more significant part of this statement is that Jesus is talking about what he's about to do. He's saying, I'm up to something. Matthew is making sure that we see that something's happening here. Something, Jesus is up to something, and he's beginning to lay out the plan for it. And he's given him a little hint here. He's saying, this is what I'm about. As a matter of fact, he's the only gospel writer that actually uses this word here, this word church. And Jesus wasn't saying, well, this is just about, I'm here, I'm just gaining a few followers so that I can go into Rome and, we're going to overthrow things and we're going to start a revolution. He's saying it's way bigger than that. It's way bigger than that. No. I'm going to do something. I'm beginning something. I envision something. I'm predicting something that's way bigger, that's going to be way more effective, and that's going to be longer lasting. I'm building my church. And here's the thing. We read that and we go, that just doesn't sound like that big a deal. I mean, it sounds like a bigger deal to think, okay, Jesus came, he's setting up shop. You talk about a gathering. The things that he can do and the influence that he has, why not just put together? He could overthrow every government. Really just with the snap of a finger. Why not do that? That sounds more effective. But Jesus is saying, no, there's a better way. And the reason that you and I read this and we don't think, wow, that's an incredible plan. You're going to build your church. Well, the reason for that is because of, I believe, where we get the word church. Our English word, and this is really a historical tragedy, by the way. When this became known, when we translated things into the English language, we got our word for church from the German word Kirche. I have no idea if that's correct, but it's close. I had to listen to it a few times. Kirche, is that right? Kirche. Literally means just house of God or house of the Lord. It's a place. It's like a building. And so we have naturally, and we all do this, when we think the church, here's the church, here's the steeple, open up the doors, and there's all the people. This is what we think, there's people inside the church. Come on, somebody, that's VBS. In case you didn't get some VBS in this summer, here it was. We think of a place that you go to and then you leave from. But it's clear by what Matthew is doing here that he is communicating that Jesus was talking about something much greater. Because really, here's what's interesting. Jesus spoke Aramaic. You may know that. And then the New Testament was actually written in a very commonly read and understood language at the time, Koine Greek. It was kind of the common language of the people. So Jesus spoke Aramaic. Matthew knew what Jesus was saying. He understood Jesus. He knew the intent of Jesus' words. So when he was writing his words in Greek and he was translating it, he used a different word. It wasn't this word that kind of meant, this house or this place or this building. It was really the word ekklesia, which means a called out assembly or gathering of people. That was Jesus' intent. Jesus was really not talking anything about a building or a place that you go or doors that you have to open up. He was talking about a gathering. He was saying, on you, Peter, on your profession, I am going to build my ecclesia. I'm going to build my people. I'm going to build my gathering. What I envision are pockets of people and gatherings all around the world in every nation, in every place, and they're going to be gathering together to praise my name. And it's going to be an ever-growing, ever-expanding, forever. That's my plan. What do you guys think about that? That's the plan. You see, an ecclesia, this is so important. We've got to get this. If we could use the word ecclesia instead of church, we might begin to shift our thinking a little bit. An ecclesia is a gathering of Jesus followers, this is for us, who are called together to share the responsibility of building the kingdom. That's what we're here for. And that's what Jesus was introducing that day. He was letting them know, this is what the plan is. I've presented all this new stuff to you. A new way, the old is gone, the new has come. I'm establishing something new. And the new for the future is a new way for people to call on my name. A new way, a new approach to your Heavenly Father. And it is going to be through this gathering of people, of Jesus followers who share the responsibility to grow and to build the kingdom. That's what my plan is. And that's bigger than any army, anything we could possibly do. And I can just imagine, like, this was a moment of, he's trying to motivate him a little bit, which, his disciples were still not just perfectly clear. What does this have to do with anything? What kind of plan is that? Why are we here again? What do you mean a people? Like your people, like us people, like your disciple people, like what do you mean? And he says, but it's going to be so strong, what I envision, that there is nothing, not even the gates of Hades or hell or death, however you interpret that word, will not overcome it. Nothing in all the world, not my death, not your death. There is no power, not the mighty Roman Empire is going to be able to overcome my people. You can burn down synagogues and church buildings all day long, but you cannot eliminate or overcome my gatherings, my assembly, my people. And I imagine that, it's like, okay, not real sure what you're talking about, Jesus, but that sounds so amazing. We have the advantage of looking back in time and seeing how that has begun to play out. At the time, though, they didn't know what that meant. It was still just a few of them. You're going to grow and build your people. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Well, then the next thing he says to Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now that sounded good. I can just imagine. Again, this is, I'm having to read between the lines a little bit here, but I just imagine that sounded better. It was like, okay, back to the kingdom of heaven stuff. The kingdom, kingdom building. There we go, Jesus. The keys to the kingdom. You're about to, this is the thing that's going to start the car, that's going to rev up the engine. That sounds great. Give us the keys. Like, what's it going to take? Awesome. You're laying out the plan, the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And I can just imagine that over the next months and even, year or so, however much time it was to bring us back to where we were last week when they were entering into Jerusalem for the very last time. Imagine it was conversations like these that continued to crop up among themselves. As they were talking about, I wonder who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. I wonder who's going to serve on the right and on the left of Jesus in this coming kingdom. We're so excited about that. And the keys to the kingdom, like he's going to give us the keys to the kingdom, and we're going to put together a people. Maybe he means an army. I can just imagine some of the conversations they had. Maybe we're going to put an army together, and we're going to go, and we're just going to take over. And of course, a lot of people are there. Thousands and thousands of people have poured into Jerusalem. We talked about this last week, that this is Passover week, and they did this every year. They've been celebrating Passover for a couple of thousand years, 1,500 years or so. And so they knew like this was super important. And so everybody's pouring into the holy city, into Jerusalem. And Jesus was one of them. And so they're preparing. Now we're to Thursday now, and they're preparing to celebrate Passover. The disciples don't know, what we know now. They're just getting ready to do what they've always done with Jesus, and really since they were little boys. They remember celebrating, going to Jerusalem, celebrating this Passover meal. Maybe it was something they did at the synagogue back in Galilee, near Capernaum, where they were from. Maybe it was something they did there, but they knew what Passover was. And so they show up into the city, and the disciples go say, hey, Jesus, where do you want us to go do this, to set the meal up so that we can celebrate? And they go set this meal up, and that night they all come together. And they're celebrating this meal. They knew the deal, and like they're going through the motions, and Jesus is talking to them some and giving us some insight. But Matthew doesn't tell us a whole lot about their conversation, except what was new. John gives us a bunch of details about what happened that night. Matthew, not so much. He just lets us know the new part because he was interested in the new stuff. And so Jesus, he gets to the kind of the end of this, and he takes the bread. While they were eating, he takes some bread, and he broke it, and he gave thanks for it. And then he said to his disciples, I want you to take this and eat it. This is my body. Okay. That's weird. Like, that one's a weird one. I think I heard you say this once before, but okay. This is your body. Yeah, that's different. Hadn't seen that part of the story before. Well, then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them. And this is what he said, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood. Oh. of the new covenant. Or some translations just say covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Okay, so now this part made a little more sense because they connected blood with covenant. They understood that. They understood that for generations that they had been in a covenant with their heavenly Father. But Jesus was saying, the old covenant failed. The Mosaic covenant is gone. It's a thing of the past. It failed. Israel was unfaithful over and over and over again. And so Jesus was coming to establish a new covenant. And this time, it wasn't based on our faith or our faithfulness. It was based on His faithfulness through His blood. It wasn't about striving to get to God anymore. Jesus was saying, I'm going to eliminate sin. I'm going to offer the forgiveness of sin through my blood. It's going to be my sacrifice, and this is the initiation of a brand new covenant. This is a new deal. And this was a little bit of news to them. But then he says this. This is so interesting. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Now again, this is like Revised Trip Standard Version, okay? So not this, but here's kind of my thoughts here. They're still kingdom-minded. They're still like physical, earthly kingdom-minded. They're still thinking maybe along those lines, and we know that because of what happened to them later that evening. But at this point, they're thinking, okay, like that's got some traction. We talked about the keys of the kingdom and talked about growing and building something, this group of people, and now you're telling us that you're not going to party until we party in the kingdom. That sounds great. Like we're going to wait until this is going to be like a post-war victory party. So you're saying, I'm not going to drink from it again. I'm not going to drink from the fruit of the vine until I do that with you new in my Father's kingdom. And I can just imagine them getting a little jazzed, looking at each other. This is, again, I'm just kind of reading between the lines here. I'm just thinking, that sounds great, because they go out and they sing a hymn together. This is justification for hymns, right? And not worship songs. When they had sung a hymn together in this moment, they went out to the Mount of Olives. You know what I think? I think they ran out of there, they turned to hymn number 370 and began to sing Victory in Jesus as they ran, like to the tune of Rocky, as they ran up to the Mount of Olives. I'm not going to do it. But I can just imagine that. They've got like this, they're excited. Based on what they do later that evening, which was desert Jesus. Because at this point, they're thinking, they're still with Jesus, because they're thinking, so this is, okay. Such a weird way to get around to this, Jesus, but it sounds great. There's going to be a post-war victory party, and we're going to be a part of that. And that sounds awesome. Victory in Jesus. Give us the keys to the kingdom. But then, later that night, Jesus, they go out to the Mount of Olives for the last time. They end up in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus gets arrested, and a large crowd of people from the chief priests, their security, their guards, they come with clubs and swords. And we know that the disciples still are not thinking that it's going to be this peaceful gathering of people, because one of Jesus' companions, Matthew tells us, pulls a sword on these guys and cuts off one of their ears. And Jesus looks at him and says, no. That's not, have you not been listening? That's not what I'm about. That's not what we're doing here. We're taking a different approach. That's the way things used to be. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. I've come to start a new plan. I'm initiating something new. This isn't the way things are going to be. And then Jesus' disciples deserted him and fled off into the night. They disappeared. They left him. And Jesus is taken back into the city, and they put him in chains, and the next day they crucify him, they put him to death, and then they lay him in a tomb. Jesus' disciples just standing on the outskirts, unseen. But they know he's died, and he's been put in this tomb, and a stone has been rolled in front of it, and they're not thinking that anything is going to change. This was the end. I guess the plan failed. I guess it didn't work, because here they are. That's a Friday evening. They crucify their Lord and their Savior. And then Sunday, you know how I know that they weren't, thinking that Jesus was gonna do something amazing and miraculous? Because nobody was chilling at the tomb on Sunday morning. Nobody was there waiting on Jesus to pop out. They weren't there. Where were they? They were still huddled up in a room behind locked, closed doors, talking with one another for fear that they would be found and arrested, because now they were just wanted men. Because they were part of this heresy. They were part of this revolution that Jesus had begun, and so they knew that they were wanted men. And they were thinking, what was all the talk about the kingdom and the kingdom of heaven and keys to the kingdom and, getting this thing started and having victory and, celebrate? What happened to that? Clearly, the plan wasn't a good plan because it didn't work. He's gone. And here we are, a bunch of nobodies. What do we do? But then suddenly, the group of women who had gone out early that morning to actually prepare Jesus' body properly for burial, they come running through the door claiming that his body isn't there and that Jesus is alive and that they have actually seen him face to face. And Peter and John, they get up, they run toward the tomb. They wanted to see for themselves, and sure enough, there's nobody in there. They don't see anything, and they're wondering. That's what was recorded for us, that Peter's wondering what happened here. What happened? But then the women had also said, but Jesus told us not only is he alive, but he said he wants y'all to go back to Galilee. Go back to our old stomping grounds. Go back to where all of this began. Get back to your roots. Go back home. Go to Galilee. And I want you to wait on me there. It's what Jesus told them to tell them, and they did. And can you just imagine, the potential excitement, but a little hesitation as they're traveling back home, whistling victory in Jesus. Okay, maybe this is it. Oh, hush, Peter. No, this could be it. This could be the moment. And sure enough, Jesus meets them there, Matthew tells us. And then this is what Jesus tells them, as he's got about 120 people gathered together. And Jesus came to them and he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Which I can just imagine in that moment, it was like elbowing each other saying, see, here it comes. Because that's really him. Here he is in the flesh. He's the one. Clearly his plan maybe really did work, but it just took a little bit of time. And so here he is. And so absolutely all authority in heaven and on earth was given to you, because my goodness, you just pulled off the greatest miracle in history. You're alive. Good gracious. We're ready. What's next? Tell us what to do. Got the keys? We're ready. Nothing's going to overcome it. This is going to be great. We're going to build the people. We're going to grow this thing. We're about to head to Rome. We're about to show them what's up, because we got the man who's been given all the authority in heaven and on earth. And so what is it? What is it? And Jesus says, well, therefore, this is what it's going to look like. This is what you can expect. And they're on pins and needles, waiting on Jesus to say, therefore, go. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Wait, do what? You mean us? Nation? What's a nation? I don't even know what a nation is. I mean, what do you mean? You want us to go? That's what I want you to do. I've invited you into this mess so that you can then continue to grow this mess. In other words, I'm sending you. Here it is. I mean, this was not the plan they were looking for, but Jesus is giving them the rest of the story. He's saying, this is what it's going to look like. Yes, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. And then Jesus turned right around and he gave it away to people like you and me. He gave it away and said, and I want you to go. And notice this. Jesus didn't say, I want you to go to church. I want you to grow the church. That's what he said. You're now responsible, collectively, as we build this body of believers, as this ecclesia, this universal, worldwide, ever-growing, nothing can stop it, nothing can overcome it, not even death, obviously not my death, but not even your death one day, will overcome or have anything that can stand against what we have begun today. I want you to invite more people into this story and then invite them to do what I've taught you to do as well. In other words, I'm inviting you in to follow me, but it's not just about follow me. You can begin to follow me without believing everything, but you can't follow me without participating in what I've invited you to do. So now I'm commanding you to do something more than that. Don't worry. Surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. And then he left. And this was written to, people 30 to 40 years after these events took place when Matthew wrote these words. And so the people reading it knew that Jesus wasn't around anymore. So what does he mean? He's saying, my physical presence will no longer be with you, but my spirit will. I'm going to send my spirit. And so you have become the keys to the kingdom. You're my secret weapon. You're my secret plan. You see, here's the essence of the new covenant. The essence of what Jesus was establishing here wasn't about, just kind of gathering a group of followers and people that were kind of looked like him and talked like him and smelled like him. He was putting together a group of followers so that they can then go and do likewise and do the same. He was establishing a new covenant because the old covenant had failed. And this new covenant was no longer based on our faith, but on his faithfulness and his presence in our lives. Jesus said, I can do more in you and through you than I can do alone. And so it's better that I go because I'm going to send my spirit to you. You see, the new covenant comes with an invitation to follow, yes, but also with a command to go. It's an invitation to come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest, but then to go and do something with it. Our responsibility, our collective responsibility as an ecclesia, as a gathering of people, is to do what Jesus came to do. In other words, the ecclesia is plan A, and there isn't a plan B. Did you know that? That there's no other option. Because an ecclesia, as the ecclesia, you and I, if you're going to be part of this, have been called out to participate in God's activity in the world. You and I have been given the opportunity to participate in God's activity in the world. This wasn't just something that was for us. It was something that was for us to provide and to invite others into as well. It's not just going to church, it's growing the church. That's our mission. That's our vision. Those are our values. That's who we are. It's not just what happens within. It's why you can have church in a high school, because it's never been about a building. I mean, buildings are convenient because you don't have to set up and tear down every single week. Praise you, Jesus. That sounds amazing. But that's not who we are. We are the ecclesia. We are the body of Christ. And we've been called out, in other words, given a purpose to participate in God's activity in the world. Do you know how I know that the plan is the only plan? Because Jesus hasn't been around now physically for 2,000 years, and yet here we are. Explain that. How did it even get out of the first century? Go read up on Jewish history in that first century and see if you think it makes any sense that Christianity survived if it wasn't for the fact that Jesus actually was who he says he was, that he really is alive and that people saw him. That's why you and I are the plan, because we have been for the last 2,000 years, and we still are until kingdom come, until Jesus returns again. So the question is that we all have to be willing to grapple with as you get to the end of a book like Matthew's Gospel. What is my next step? So what do I do now? If you're a Christian, if you're a believer, you've got to be willing to ask this question. What do I do next? How can I participate? Sitting in a row, feeling a little bad about yourself every now and then leaving for 6.5 days maybe isn't what Jesus had in mind. What was Jesus predicting? He was predicting an ever-growing, because anybody can overcome that. But the reason that it has survived for 2,000 years is because there has always been a remnant of people who have been willing to do way more. What's your next step? Because it may be some things like this. Maybe just being willing to pray for your leaders. Are you doing that? You praying for us? You praying for people in other churches and other pastors? I do that regularly. Pray for other leaders and other pastors as well. Are you connecting with believers in a small group? Have you jumped into one? Or, are you connecting or making excuses? Because making excuses is way easier. But Jesus wants us to participate. Like, this is an ecclesia. I want you to be together. Are you serving through your gifts? And it doesn't have to be in this church. It can be outside the church, in your community, but using your God-given gifts in order to what? Grow his ecclesia. What about supporting its ministries? Being generous with the resources and with what God has blessed you with. That is what we've been called to do. We are a called out people who have been invited into this shared responsibility of growing the kingdom, of being the ecclesia, not just a church building. That's what we've been invited to do. Would you bow your heads with me? If you're not a Christian here today, you would consider yourself the one sitting on the sidelines, a little bit skeptical, didn't really see it this way before. Maybe this is just all unusual for you and you've still got your doubts and your questions. There's nothing wrong with that. But Jesus has still made the invitation simple for you. He just says, I just want you to follow me. Maybe that's your next step. And I want to give you an opportunity to take it. You can just pray right along with me. Jesus, thank you for what you began 2,000 years ago. For creating this new plan that involves people, not institutions. That involves gatherings of believers, not just church buildings. I want to be a part of that. I confess to you that I am a sinner and I need a mighty, alive Savior who loves me. And I give my life to you. And I want to live for you all my days. And I pray it in the mighty, matchless, and wonderful name of Jesus.